The only way to change a bad government is to have a better opposition. And I know something about changing bad governments as Chief of Staff to the opposition leader who 8 years ago to this day ended the Rudd-Gillard years with a landslide win. And as a Victorian, I've also got a vested interest in getting better government for this state, given that no city in the world has suffered as much as Melbourne from lockdowns that haven't worked to eliminate COVID but have worked to wipe out a state's confidence in itself. Now, with a new state leader chosen this morning, Victorian Liberal MPs think they'll henceforth be a better opposition. But as I said last night, it's not who leads the opposition that matters, but what the opposition stands for and what difference the opposition would make should they be elected to power. Forget the spin and the focus group niceties where they tell you what you want to hear. The first job of an opposition is to hold the government to account. That certainly doesn't mean opposing everything, but does mean closely scrutinising what the government does for incompetence, for bad faith and double standards. And that means knowing what you stand for yourselves, as there are a few things worse than an opposition that simultaneously attacks the government for, let's say, spending too much, but then later accuses it of not spending enough on this area or that, because inconsistency and hypocrisy derail campaigns. Today, the newly re-elected Victorian opposition leader Matthew Guy observed that it was difficult to get airtime as a state opposition leader during the COVID period, and that's true enough. But it's never easy to get airtime. Never for an opposition leader, unless you've actually got something distinctive to say. Good oppositions don't wait for space in the news cycle to get their point across, they make space. When you have opportunities to run on issues, good oppositions take them. Here's an example. Under the Andrews government, state debt has gone from 6 to 27% of gross state product. The public sector employment, well, that's ballooned from 277,000 in June 2015 to 322,000 in June last year. But it's never really been clear what the opposition thought about this. Has Victoria been investing wisely in necessary infrastructure, or has the state been wasting money on white elephants that cost way more than they should because of sweetheart deals with the state's militant construction union? Has the state been improving schools by employing more and better teachers, or has it been padding the payrolls to boost the unionised workforce with people who want to push their ideology in the classroom? Why has Victoria's health system been at breaking point throughout this pandemic? Its contact tracing, we know, subpar, its ICU capacity in need of urgent upgrades, if the Andrews government really was as good as the Premier tells us, especially given he's either been the Health Minister or the Premier for 11 of the past 15 years. There's been any number of press releases from the opposition over the past 7 years, both under the deposed Michael O'Brien and the recycled Matthew Guy, but there's never really been a coherent view of exactly what the Andrews government has been doing wrong and exactly how it should be different. Was the opposition for or against the new laws allowing people to change their birth gender every 12 months? For or against the so-called Safe Schools program that was really radical social engineering dressed up as anti-bullying? For or against even more so-called safe drug injecting rooms that are actually magnets for crime and that normalise deeply destructive law breaking? Should the lockdowns have been the first or last resort when it came to managing COVID? We know that the Andrews government is brutal, is ruthless. We know what it thinks because we in Melbourne have been in a virtual prison for over 200 days, but the Victorian Liberals, well, they've never really told us what they thought. I'm not saying that the opposition should have a fully formed pandemic policy from day one, or even that they should have a comprehensive alternative now. But you'd think that a party that supposedly believes in freedom might at least have been able to articulate the principles that would inform their view, that they would fight for small business, let's say, to reopen, that they would want to demand the release of all and every bit of health information. See what I'm saying? My biggest problem with the Andrews government is not that it makes mistakes, because no government ever gets it 100% right, particularly in a crisis. My problem is that the Andrews government has no integrity. That it's a government you can't trust. It's a government led by a bloke who thrives on denigrating those that challenge him rather than allowing a good argument or good results to win people over. The fact that his own party in the state of Victoria, the Labor Party, has had to call the administrators in because it was so rotten says everything. Under his watch, we've seen 801 Victorians lose their lives because of quarantine failures. Not me, that's the findings of the Coate report. And that inquiry that was meant to get to the bottom of who did what, why, it was set up to fail and no one took responsibility.
I can't specifically recall.
I can't recall. I presume I did.
I don't recall the conversation.
And I have some memory, but not full memory.
I don't recall specifically.
Not to my recollection. I have no recollection of that.
I can't specifically recall.
And to all the Labor people who plead with me not to keep showing that grab, I will show it until you are drummed out of office. More than just that though, the red shirt scandal, the multi-million-dollar taxpayer riff-off swept under the carpet, the Lawyer X scandal and the witch hunt after George Pell, both examples giving rise to claims of a compromised police force for one and a flawed judiciary for the other. Multi-million-dollar blowouts in infrastructure with projects years and years behind schedule. Let's hope the Victorian opposition is no longer going to be overawed by the I Stand with Dan personality cult that's fed by a Premier's department that's tripled in size and a Premier's private office that's 50% bigger than even the Prime Minister's. Let's hope they'll hold the government to account now over the millions in taxpayer dollars being used for political polling and highly politicised social media deployed by the Premier. I want to hope so. And so do millions of Victorians, good people too, who might have voted Labor in the past but can't bring themselves to do it again after what's happened to their state. Matthew Guy said that Victoria needed a recovery plan. He's dead right. I just hope he's been working on that plan and starts revealing it to all of us from tomorrow and not just working on the numbers. Because the Victorian opposition doesn't just need a new face, it must have a new strategy. And Victoria doesn't just need a better opposition, it needs a much, much better government.